Long ago, in a green vale with a glistening river, there stood the walled towns and castles of the nobles. In the middle of the valley, at the foot of the mountain pass, was a stone citadel surrounded by a town and a wall. Here the king and queen lived. For many years, the king and queen desired a child, and they visited many shrines seeking a blessing. On one journey, they took a high mountain pass and came before a wayside shrine where a snowmelt spring was overflowing. A shower of flower petals fell from the trees above and floated gently down around the stones. From this occasion, to the delight of the king and queen, their wish was fulfilled. When their daughter, the princess, was born, they invited many people to the baptistry outside the cathedral where their daughter was christened. Cradling her in his arms, the king emerged from the baptistry and presented her to the kingdom, naming her Princess Basilina. With all those assembled there came the elder sisters of the Valley Abbey, wearing their habit, walking in procession, bearing gifts. In turn, they presented the princess with 3 gifts: a kind heart, a singing voice, and wise words. All the people witnessing this marveled. Now in the same valley, far to the north, was a tower, the fortress of the Marquesa Malafica. For years the Marquesa set her gaze upon the other nearby kingdoms and grew jealous of their vibrant markets, busy streets, and popular courts. Dark thoughts twisted in her mind because they were not smothered by more upright emotions at their birth. They came unbidden into her black heart with ill intent toward the other kingdoms, leading her to evil ways and sorcery. The Marquesa was not invited to the princess's christening. While she sat in her dark tower, a raven flew in and told her of this light. She became determined to attend the christening uninvited. So it was that after the procession of the Abbey sisters, a commotion arose in the back, and the crowd parted for the Marquesa Malafica. She wore a black dress trimmed with black feathers and dark green silk, long black gloves of fine wool trailing up her pale arms. The king grew agitated when he saw her approach. The queen shuddered beside him. The king greeted the unwanted guest with a shaking voice. After a small bow, the Marquesa straightened and craned her neck to look at the child. With a thin smile, the Marquesa said to the king, "Would that I had been invited, I would have brought a gift." "You were not invited, sorceress," a voice from the crowd shouted, much to the king and queen's horror. The king stuttered an apology for the outburst, but the Marquesa only pursed her lips and cocked her head. The Marquesa asked the king if he shared in the collective thoughts of the crowd. Before he could answer, another cry arose. "Begone, witch!" shouted another voice. This time the Marquesa Malafica shot a withering glance back at the crowd, and then turned to the king with a frown. Her rage boiled over. The queen tried to make amends and apologize. The king averted his eyes. Marquesa Malafica raised her hands, and the king and queen shrank back. "Nevertheless, I do bring a gift to the princess," she said. "When she comes of age, in the flower of her youth, she will prick her finger on a thorn of a flowering stem and meet her death." Having spoken the curse, the sky darkened and a cloud of noxious smoke concealed Malafica. In the echo of her derisive laughter, she vanished. The king and queen knelt before the baptistry, grieving the curse, looking pleadingly around, searching for some comfort, searching in vain for help. From the crowd, a wrinkled old woman came forth. She was a hermit who lived deep in the woods. "I cannot break the curse," the old woman replied, "but I can bestow one more gift to stay it." Holding her palms toward the baby, she spoke a blessing. "In the flower of youth, the Princess Basilina will not die, but only fall into a deep sleep. The curse will be broken when bravery is set against the curse, and the princess's wounds become her strength." Strange words. Many of the people looked away in silence, but the dark clouds parted and some of the people found hope in this blessing. For the queen, doubt crept into her heart. She looked to the king, and he stood and declared, Let all the thorny vines and bushes within these walls be uprooted and burned, whether rose, acacia, or any flowering thorn, and from this day forward it will be forbidden to plant these or keep such seedlings within my kingdom." Within the walls of the citadel, Princess Basilina grew up into a lovely young lady. However, she was never allowed to venture out beyond the walls, lest she encounter a thorn, a bramble, or any other peril for that matter. And when she visited the town or the market, she was accompanied by attendants with a matter of strict vigilance. One day, Basilina visited the market with her attendants, where there were many peddlers and craftsmen. While her attendants were distracted, she slipped away into the crowded market. Basilina weaved through the market stalls, stopping occasionally to look at wares and articles. Then she saw a poor old woman in the town square drawing out flax from a distaff onto a spinning spindle. Basilina asked if she could try to work out the flax. The woman let her, and she began to twist and spin the flax with her fingers. The flax was from the countryside. The old woman was poor, and she had gathered the flax from the wild and the roadside. As Basilina drew out the flax, a wild rose thorn was tangled in the thread and pricked her finger. The white thread turned red with blood. Basilina swooned and fell to the ground. Not only did she fall asleep, but also the townspeople, every merchant, tinker, and soldier, and everyone else in the citadel, including the king and queen, until everyone within the walls of the town slumbered under enchantment. Brambles burst through the ground within the city walls and grew over the houses, covered the gates, and crawled up over the walls, until the whole town, including its sleeping inhabitants, were covered in briars and thorns. The vines reached the center where the princess slept, and the vines bore her up and lifted her onto her back and spread beneath her like a bed of a great funeral bier. Vines wrapped around her, lifted her, and upheld her there, her face pale and her eyes gently closed. She slept. The walls and towers of the citadel could now only barely be seen from afar, blending in with the surrounding forest. The town was lost. Tales of the king and queen who once ruled in the vale drifted into obscurity. Enchantment of vines and briars hid the town. Years passed, and travelers went on their way through the valley, sometimes spotting the towers from afar, peeking out from a blanket of thick brambles. One day, a knight passed that way with his troop. He passed by the wall of briars and saw the towers in the distance and asked about the strange place. His companion told him about a spell cast over the once thriving town. Tales are told that in the center of the briars and brambles there is a beautiful princess trapped in enchantment set upon her by the Marquesa Malafica of the north. Pained by this story, the knight rode along the walls of briars and stopped at a spot that looked the most foreboding. He placed his hand on the hilt of his sword, and immediately the branches and briars began to part, making a path. He rode forward alone, the briars continuing to part before him. As he passed between the walls of brambles, red roses came forth, budding and opening on either side of him. He passed through the gate and between rows of houses until the path led to the center of the sleeping town, where the princess lay entwined in a bed of brambles. The knight dismounted and approached the sleeping beauty. When he saw her lifeless, save only for the color barely reaching her lips, he fell to his knees and cried out in savage outrage, his cry echoing through the valley. To his surprise, the vines began to move, withdrawing and untangling, blooming as they withdrew from the girl. She woke from the enchantment and found her strength at once. She stood and lifted the knight to his feet. The knight stared at her as she took in her surroundings. Her eyes fell upon the townspeople still sleeping and the brambles wrapped around the citadel, for only she had awoken and no one else. "Who are you, and what happened to me?" asked the princess. The knight told her the story of her enchantment set upon her by the Marquesa of the North. The princess knew these things to be true, for in her sleep she had not been dreamless. She had spun and unwound many things while she slept, and many truths were revealed to her. "There is only one thing to be done," she told the knight. "I must go and confront the Marquesa to lift this curse on my people, though I do not know the way." "I know the way," said the knight. "Allow me to come with you." "Together then," replied the princess, "come what may." So the knight mounted his horse and the princess behind him on the saddle. They rode north, where the land was covered in black shale, sparse trees and heavy snow. A raven perched in the tree saw them coming and flew to warn the Marquesa. She became furious at their boldness, and in her rage the Marquesa Malafica transformed into a hideous green boar with black tusks. She charged through the forest to trample the trespassers. The princess and the knight heard the terrible hoofbeats coming toward them. Princess Basilina dismounted, raised her arms, and sang into the darkness of that place a song of light and harmony. Her song called forth great thorny vines full of roses, thick and blooming, bursting through the black shale, and creating a great wall encircling the Marquesa in her dreadful form. In that circle, too, was the knight who, finding the Marquesa confounded by the magic roses around her and off her guard, drew his sword and fell upon the boar. The Marquesa saw him come and swung her tusks to gore him, but the knight lunged and jumped around her giant head and thrust his sword into her side. She thrashed and cut him. The knight hewed at her and made a killing strike that slew the boar and caused the Marquesa to return to her human form, now dead and ruined upon the ground. The princess buried the Marquesa with vines that drew her into the earth. Basilina and the knight journeyed home. When they arrived back at the citadel, the brambles had gone and everyone was awake, carrying on about their normal lives. The princess came to the citadel, and those that greeted her stopped short and were speechless, for her bearing was radiant. Wearing a wreath of thorny roses around her neck, she was wonderful to behold. So it happened that the walled town was restored, and all were glad to see the princess, and the king and queen welcomed her home. From that day on, with the brave knight as her captain, Princess Basilina set about her rule with strength, grace, and beauty. The end.
Thank you for watching. This was one of our first animated stories made possible by a crowdfunding campaign. If you like this video, become a supporter to help us produce our next animated fairy tale or myth. In the comments, let us know which images and scenes from the story you like the best. This story retelling was written and produced by P.S. Beckmann. Please see below to learn more about the writer, artists, and other contributors.